All right, if you have your Bibles, then let's go to the book of Ecclesiastes again as we go into week 4 of this series, Life Under the Sun, Living Well in a World Gone Mad. And the person who's teaching us about that, God, of course, but through the person who's called the teacher in this book. It's most likely Solomon. And so we hear very quickly in that first week, in that first chapter, in verse 13, what the purpose of this book is, which is to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. And what he talks about very quickly, right out of the gate, is that life under the sun, under the fall, is complicated and it's complex and it's hard to understand. It's like a mist or a fog. You try to grab a hold of it and there's nothing there to grab a hold of. It's hevel, one of my favorite words over the last few weeks. You know, you lose your keys and can't find them and you're running late and it's like, life's hevel. It's right there in the Bible. And so this King Solomon, the wisest man in the history of the world, comes to the conclusion that wisdom and understanding and information doesn't help. It didn't lead him to feel satisfied with his solution because it doesn't change anything. There's nothing, you can know everything, and if you can't do anything about it, then what difference does it make? And so then in chapter 2, he tries pleasure. I mean, one of the most wealthy people to ever live, he spared no expense at just trying it all out. And he came to the conclusion that while knowledge doesn't change anything, pleasure doesn't last. It's fun for a minute, and then it's gone. And so then last week in chapter 3, we heard the words that every unbeliever even knows from the book of Ecclesiastes, which is, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Turn, turn, turn. Maybe that's been in your head like it was mine the first part of this week because we talked about it. And so those last words are important there, under heaven, because that's different than under the sun. We're getting God's perspective now a little bit into this book. And so after that famous part in verses 1 through 8, there's the part that explains it, which is really the key of it, because it's not this sort of, artistic, beautiful display of fatalism. It's actually pointing us to the fact that God is the one who is in control of the seasons of our lives and what part comes when, and he's outside of time and manages it. And so, as we put it last week, God's sovereignty has a chronology to it. He is sovereign over the seasons. The frustrating part about that for us is that we don't like that. We want to be in control of the seasons, or at least be able to understand what's going on. But verse 11 in chapter 3 says that that's just not possible. God's put eternity in our hearts, but we can never understand what he's doing from beginning to end, at least in this life, because he's outside of time and we are experiencing life inside of it. And so it's like this picture, that you have to back up to see the grand scene that's being played out. But the reality is in life, you can never back up far enough because you're not God. You can't back up far enough to see the whole picture. What I didn't mention last week as we kind of wrapped up is that this is a statement of faith from the teacher. It's not like he's observed anything new under the sun that led him to this conclusion that God's going to make everything beautiful in its time and that he has a purpose and so forth. No, it's faith. It's believing God's word that what he said is true even when it doesn't seem like it, because he's been very clear about his observations, and we'll see it some more tonight, that it doesn't lead you to think those things. And so it is a matter of faith. And so that brings us up then to where we left off last week in the middle of chapter 3. We're 4 weeks in and we're only in the middle of chapter 3 right now. We're going to pick up the pace tonight and get all the way to the end of chapter 5. And so we're going to move fast. I found another church that had done a series on this week. And when I looked at the entire series, they were in the book of Ecclesiastes for 37 weeks. Now, I don't know that I could do it that long, so we're going to keep it to 6 or maybe 7, and so we got to pick up the pace a little bit, and so buckle up, let's go. So at the end of last week, we talked about the fact that when you think about the seasons of life and the time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, the problem that quickly comes up in our hearts and in our minds is that there's a lot of things that we would rather not have. We would love to have the time to be born and not the time to die. I don't know about you, but I would like a lot more time to plant than I would to uproot, a lot more time to win than to lose. But the whole passage was saying that that is not our job. That's not our problem. And that brings up a lot of questions. And so the teacher then, for the next 2.5 chapters, is going to wrestle with some of these universal challenges that we all face. They're the yeah, but what about kind of questions. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you're having a conversation with someone, maybe you're having a friendly debate, and with everything that you say, they go, yeah, but what about... Right? For the record, I love that kind of conversation. In fact, if you know me, you know the more comfortable I am with you, the more that we can have those kind of conversations and push back. And I love it when we can have that kind of thing. It's part of being an INTJ. I love digging into the details and trying to figure out stuff. And so Ecclesiastes is a good book for me. And so if you live long enough under the sun, then even no matter what, when you're presented with the idea that God is sovereign over the seasons of this life, sooner or later you're going to have to wrestle with some of these questions. Like, for instance, the two that we kind of mentioned last week. First of all, how can God be in control when X, Y, or Z is happening? Or the one that pairs with it every single time, how can God be good when the things that are happening around us are happening? Like, for instance, yesterday being the 20th anniversary of September 11th. You remember churches were full the couple of weeks after that because people were trying to go. They were trying to find answers to, God, why? Why did you let this happen? Why didn't you stop it? What's going on? And so, like any good instructor does, teachers, you know this, he doesn't just answer the question immediately. He lets us work on it on our own for a little while. He lets us sit in it for a little while during these verses. And so let's begin tonight at the beginning of chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes. Again, I observed all the acts of oppression being done under the sun. Look at the tears of those who are oppressed. They have no one to comfort them. Power is with those who oppress them. They have no one to comfort them. And so the first, yeah, but what about question that we deal with here in these chapters is, yeah, but what about injustice? If God's in control, then how do we make sense of all of this? And people are still making that argument today, right? I mean, it's almost like there's nothing new under the sun, which is what the teacher's been saying. How can we say that God's in control, or along with it, that he's entirely good, when you look around at the world, at 9/11, at Afghanistan, at Darfur, all of these horrible injustices? The reality is that the teacher is going to come back around to this a couple of times just in these sections, and then a little bit more on later in the book. Chapter 3, verse 16, which is actually where we left off last week, he says, I also observed under the sun there is wickedness at the place of judgment and wickedness at the place of righteousness. And then towards the end of this section, in chapter 5, he comes back to the topic one more time. If you see oppression of the poor and perversion of justice and righteousness in the province, don't be astonished at this situation, because one official protects another official, and higher officials protect them. The buck always can be, there's somewhere higher up where you can always pass the buck, right? That song from White Christmas. I think it's one of the reasons I'm beginning to love this book more and more, is the just stark realism of the teacher here. He's not trying to paint this rosy picture of the world. He's going like, look, the people who are oppressed, they have no one to comfort them, and the power is with the oppressor. And he's saying, don't be surprised when you see perversion of justice and government officials, you scratch my back and I scratch yours, you vote for this bill, and then I won't oppose that bill, and it's reality. There's nothing new under the sun. Christians should not be surprised. Believers in Jesus Christ, we believe that we are all sinful, and without the blood of Jesus making us into new creations, then that's just the way that it is. And even then, our old man still always wants to come back up. And so there's no reason for us to be shocked at these things. I'll never cease to be amazed at the amazement of Christians at sin in the world, like it's some big shock. No, this is reality of life under the sun. And by the way, just a side note for here, we're going to jump around a lot tonight because this is really like a conversation. The flow of this, I mean, it's not this linear thing, because you think about the way that conversations have. If you're debating and talking and you're really having a good conversation with somebody, if you try to map out the conversation, you ever go like, how in the world did we get here? We were talking about something completely unrelated, and now we're all the way over talking about this. That's kind of way that these chapters go. And so we're going to be jumping around because he does come back to the same things, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. And so we went to chapter 3 and then chapter 5 and then back to chapter 3, and we're going to do that some more the rest of the night. And so what's the teacher's answer to this question? Well, here it is. They're all going to die, and then the judgment. Chapter 3, verse 17, he says, I said to myself, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time for every activity and every work. So remember, he's just waxed poetic about how there's a season for everything, and that God will make everything beautiful in its time, and that he's in control of it. And now he comes to this and going like, there is a time where every action and every work is going to be judged. Another statement of faith from the teacher. This is one of the reasons I think that it's written from a place of belief, because he's not seeing anything that would make him think that. He believes it by faith. There's nothing that you could observe around us that would make you think that all justice is going to be put right, injustice is going to be put right in the end. And yet that is what we believe. That's our hope. That nobody, listen, when the time of your life and the time of other people's judgment don't happen to overlap. You know what I'm saying there? So you've got this amount of time. You don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe they completely fall right after it's your time to die. Or they face the final judgment clearly after you die. It seems like they're getting away with it from your perspective, but your perspective is limited and God's is not. So rest assured, the teacher is saying to us, nobody is getting away with anything, which that statement should be at the same time incredibly comforting to us when you think about the injustices you've experienced or that you've seen in your life. And it should be equally sobering for us, don't you think? Because nobody is getting away with anything, including me. And not only the things that I do, but the things that I think and the motivations for the things that I do are all known and will be judged by a holy God. So the first question is, but what about injustice? The second one then would be, well, what about all the loneliness, all the isolation in the world, people who don't have anybody? Ecclesiastes chapter 4 has a lot about this. It says, again, I saw futility under the sun. There's a person without companion, without even a son or brother. And though there's no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. Who am I struggling for, he asks, and depriving myself of good things? This too is futile and a miserable task. So get the picture in your head here. In our day, I think it would look like a man in his, maybe mid-50s, getting close to 60, who's an executive at a company. He has it all, sort of the life that everybody would wish for. And the reality is that it's not a life, if you experience, that any of us would wish for, because there's nothing there. It's all hevel. It's missed. It's the old statement of like he could buy, everybody in the restaurant supper, but no one would actually want to eat it with him. It's that kind of world. And then in chapter 4, 9 through 12, it has this more famous passage in the book about how about 2 is better than 1 and 3 is better than 2. And the point that the teacher's making in this section is that we are social creatures. We're made for community. We're made in the image of God, who is 3 in 1, and we long for that same kind of relationship, close, intimate relationships with other people. Life lived alone, and I don't just mean lived alone in a house, but lived alone with no friends, no family, no church community, life lived for yourself, you will quickly find, sucks the joy out of life. This guy's going, what am I doing all this for? I've got no one to share it with. And then in chapter 4, verses 13 through 16, he gives the example of a king, a political leader who rises up from prison all the way to being king, and he's everybody's hero for a little while until the next guy comes along and they all follow him and forget all about the first guy. Isn't that the way it always is? I mean, if you've lived for any amount of time or just look back at history, you see this leader and everybody's gung-ho about him, and then there's the next one that comes, and pretty soon that guy is all but forgotten. So the teacher doesn't make the answer to that problem clear immediately like he did the first. He just lays out the problem and he implies sort of the answer, which is in this life that we are living, don't get so busy that you don't see the people around you, because you're going to die. And when you come to that moment, your time to die, it's the relationships, the people that will matter the most. We all know this is true, right? If you think about the day of your death right now, which this book encourages us over and over and over to do, what you're going to think about is people, not stuff. I realized also this week as I was thinking about this, that loneliness is something, we tend to think of it as something that's external to people, but reality is there's a lot of people who are lonely because they don't like other people, or because they don't have maybe the emotional intelligence, or no, let's just put it this way. You know the person, I'm sure they would pop into your mind right now, where if you see them in Walmart, you start playing, the shopping ninja, hiding behind, like, I think I'm going to go down this aisle. I just forgot I needed something because I really, I don't have time today to have a 45-minute conversation about nothing with this guy and, have him invite himself over and et cetera, right? This sounds terrible, but there are people who are lonely and it's their fault. Now, not everybody, of course, but you all know what I'm talking about. There's a reason why some people are like that. I hope that's not you. I thought about this. I really hope that's not the main word that you need to hear tonight. I doubt it is. But the reality is that we can do something about loneliness. That is something, like, I understand. I'm not talking about being lonely for someone that you've lost or something like that, but just in general, like, people want to have relationships, but we have to pursue them. The other thing that the teacher kind of says here with the story about the king is, oh yeah, but don't worry too much about what people think about you either, because it's not going to last long either way. Having real friends is a part of the gift of God to humanity. Trying to be popular and liked by everybody is like pursuing the wind. You're never going to catch up, and even if you do, for a minute, it'll be gone the next. They're just going to go on to the next thing, the next person, as soon as the new wears off. How about the next one? Yeah, but what about the Joneses? So this objection is not so much about the problem of evil in the world, like the first two have, as much as it is a problem of the evil in our own hearts. It's not so much that we're struggling to believe that God's in control of the seasons of our life. It's that we don't want to believe it, because that means that we would have to be content with it, and we don't really do well with contentedness, especially in our culture. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4. I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to one person's jealousy of another. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and a pursuit of the wind. So this is really the flip side of the injustice that he was talking about earlier. This is the one where the first was the one with power abusing the one who's weaker. This is more about the weaker one, the less well-off one being jealous and wanting more of what the more powerful one does, so that he can act the same way. You see how the motivation is the same? So you think about, you work hard, you come up from nothing, you put in the hours, you do well, And what do your neighbors say before too long? Well, it's easy for him. I mean, gosh, he's got it made. Look at the truck he drives. Look at all this stuff. Can't win for losing, right? And then the teacher picks this back up in chapter 5. The one who loves silver is never satisfied with silver, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. When good things increase, the ones who consume them multiply. What then is the profit to the owner except to gaze at them with his eyes? The sleep of the worker is sweet whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich permits him no sleep. So what's the teacher's answer to the question of what about the Joneses? I think the answer is, what about the Joneses? What about them? You think that they're happier than you just because they have more than you have? Like, when has that ever been true? Right? When has that ever been true of our own lives and of others? And yet we keep falling for the bait all the time. Here's the secret. The Joneses don't care about you. You know, all the people that, whoever it is, whatever their last name is, Jones is a placeholder there, obviously. All the time that you spend thinking about them, what they have, how you deserve it more than they do, that they're not godly and you are, all that time that you spend thinking about them, they're not thinking about you. And according to the teacher, if that's your motivation for your work in the world, you're not going to find any joy here. In fact, you'll actually find that you're destroying yourself from the inside out. And that part of riches leads to the last of these, which is, yeah, but what about death? That is the real punchline of it all, isn't it? I mean, when we talk about God being sovereign over the seasons, the time to be born and the time to die and everything in between in our lives, when people have objections to it, if they're going to say, yeah, but what about, most of the time it's a tragic death in their lives. And all death is tragic. The reason the teacher brings this up over and over, I mean, he just keeps pounding away, and he's going to continue at this notion of death, is because it's fundamental to his point in the book of Ecclesiastes. It is the overarching cloud that's hanging over humanity all the time. We don't want to think about it. We try to put it off. We try to, just avoid the topic if at all possible. But reality is we all know that we have an expiration date. The problem with life under the sun is eventually the sun sets, and so does ours. It is the ultimate futility of life. The ultimate hevel is death. I went to an estate sale not far from here with my son the other day, and he asked, what does estate mean on the way there? And so I was explaining it to him, and I said, if mommy and daddy die, and then I thought to myself, not if, when mommy and daddy die. Ecclesiastes has made that clear in my mind. It's when, not if. I mean, I knew that already, but he's been drilling it home every single week. So he starts this section that we're in tonight in chapter 3, verse 16, which we already read, but we'll read it again in the context here, talking about death. He says, I also observed under the sun, there's wickedness at the place of judgment, and there's wickedness at the place of righteousness. I said to myself, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time for every activity and every work. I said to myself, this happens so that God may test the children of Adam, and they may see for themselves that they are like animals. For the fate of the children of Adam and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. People have no advantage over animals, since everything is futile. All are going to the same place. All come from dust, and all return to dust. What great encouragement, what great words to live by from the teacher, right? Why don't you put that on a coffee mug and drink from it in the morning? So he starts there and he ends there as well, bookending this section, talking about death. Chapter 5, verse 13, there is a sickening tragedy that I have seen under the sun, wealth kept by its owner to his harm. That wealth was lost in a bad venture, so that when he fathered a son, he was empty-handed. As he came from his mother's womb, so he will go again, naked as he came. He will take nothing for his efforts that he can carry in his hands. This, too, is a sickening tragedy. Exactly as he comes, so he will go. What does one gain who struggles for the wind? And what is more, he eats in darkness all his days with much frustration, sickness, and anger. So here the question about wealth and status, keeping up with the Joneses, flows over into the question of death, because even if you could catch up with them and surpass them even, you all end up at the same place at the end, right? You don't get to take it with you. Those words that he uses, nothing you can carry in your hands. The teacher just won't let go of this. One of the core messages of the books, he keeps bringing it up over and over and over because he knows that as the wisest man who's ever lived, that facing the facts, the cold, hard reality of life and death is the only way that we can learn to live well in the time that God has allotted for us. Actually, probably learned it on some level, at least from his dad, King David, who said, "Teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts." And so what are we supposed to do with these couple of chapters? Well, chapter 5, verse 18, wrapping it up. "Here is what I have seen to be good. It is appropriate to eat, drink, and experience good in all the labor one does under the sun during the few days of his life God has given him, because that is his reward." Now, if you were listening last week and that sounds familiar, good. I'm glad you remembered, because it's expounding on, it's just another way of saying the same thing of what he said in chapter 3, verse 12. "I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and enjoy the good life. It is also the gift of God when anyone eats, drinks, and enjoys all of his efforts." So what the teacher really wants us to grasp is this point, that everything he's been talking about in the last two chapters has been leading back to this same resolution. Just a reassertion of what he said in the middle of chapter 3, which is, if we will slow down, it's a hard word, isn't it? Slow down. If we will slow down and savor life as a gift from God, we will find that it is full of joys that are a gift from a loving Father. You think about the things that he says right here: eat and drink. Most of the time, those things happen with other people, in family, getting together with a friend, as they should. That's part of God's gift. That's what he was talking about in chapter 4 there. That we would eat and drink. And he keeps talking about enjoying our work. You were made, do you know this? You were made for work. Before the fall, before there was sin, but in God's perfect creation, Adam had a job, and so did Eve. And so you just think about, how would it be different? I don't know whether you have a career and a job that you absolutely love, or one that you absolutely despise, or most of us that are somewhere in the middle most days. How would it be different if we thought about it this way? That finding joy in doing your job and doing it well is part of God's gift to you in right now. If you're a teacher, if you're a plumber, a professor, a preacher, a nuclear physicist, all of us can use what God has given us for his glory and for our joy as we work in the world. The thing to do, what is good, is to eat and drink with other people and enjoy your work under the sun. So enjoy the good life, experience all the good. This doesn't mean, kind of kick back, take it easy, and be lazy, right? We already talked about that. You actually destroy yourself when you do that. What it means is keeping all of this in balance, which is a lot easier said than done. I understand that. It means being content with the season of life that God has placed you in right now, whether that's good or bad, because you're thoroughly convinced by faith that it is for your ultimate good. Maybe the first time ever that I have quoted or showed a little clip from Uncle Si from Duck Dynasty, but there was this little clip that they put out, years ago when the show was still on, that just cracks me up every time I see it. And his motto, his sort of philosophy of life.
America, everybody is in too big of a rush. Lay back, take a sip of tea, mow a little grass, and then if you get tired, take you a nap. Work hard, nap hard. Play hard. That's what I always say, Jack. Work hard, nap hard. Work hard, nap hard. Work hard, nap hard. Play hard. That's what I always say, Jack.
I'm not. That's right. Work hard, nap hard, play hard. I like that philosophy, and I think that the teacher would agree. This is the joy. Take a sip of tea, mow a little grass, work hard, play hard, and find rest, because you don't have to be God over your life. You can let God do that. We can't understand. Chapter 3 told us this. We can't understand what God is doing from the beginning to the end. What we can do, I don't have control over what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what it's going to bring. I don't know. I really don't know what happened yesterday. And not only because I can't remember it, but because there was so much. I'm talking about the entire world. I don't know what happened yesterday and a little bit of what happened in my life, but God does, and He knows the future. But what we can do is eat and drink and try our best to experience all of the good gifts that He gives us as we labor under the sun, all the while trusting that the one who is above the sun is doing something, and everything that He does is good. See, that perspective on life, it sets us free to be able to enjoy life as a gift rather than as gain. Every week we said we were going to go back to the greater teacher, Jesus, the one who said He was greater than Solomon. Thinking about our death is a good thing. This is what this book talks about, and it'll talk about it even more later on, because it gives us this ability to rightly view our lives and enjoy the time that we have and use it wisely. But death itself is not a gift. I want to make that clear that death is not a gift. We all know that death is the enemy. It's the one thing, it's the ultimate futility, like we said before. And the good news for us on this side of the resurrection, we have a perspective. We have a view that Solomon did not have the privilege of having, which is death has been itself dealt a final deadly blow. We have the benefit of being on this side of the resurrection. We know that death is not the end. Like the song that Molly Skaggs, Ricky Skaggs' daughter, and Hillsong did, "Ain't No Grave," the old song, they made a redid version of it. And they sing this bridge, and this line just gets me every time I hear it. It makes me so excited, which is, if you walked out of the grave, I'm walking too. If you walked out of the grave, I'm walking too. That's good news for us. See, when we're looking at death, and we can look at our own allotted time, a time to be born and a time to die, and trust God that He is in control of it, because we know that death is not the end. Or it may be the end of this life, but then it will be in heaven for however long, and then one day there will be a new creation. The same thing that happened to Jesus is going to happen to my body and yours and everyone else who follows and trusts in Christ. I have to think about Solomon in heaven. I don't know, there's no scripture that I can point to for this, but did the people in heaven know what was going on when Jesus died and was resurrected? For sure, obviously, when He showed back up in heaven, His glorified body, they would know. But I have to think about Solomon, who's written this book and searched his whole life trying to find meaning in life under the sun, and has always struggled with this problem of death. And he has to be just going, yes, finally something has been done about the ultimate problem on earth, in life under the sun. Death has been defeated. Not completely yet, because obviously we're still dying, but one day it will be where we can literally, you think about the person who, your grandparents, your parents, your children, your loved ones who are literally standing over their own graves in physical bodies, glorified bodies. And then I think that there will be a lot of people saying the words of the verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, death, where's your sting? I'm standing on my grave. Where's your sting, death? Oh, grave, where is your victory? See, because we know that we have hope and joy in the future, because we know that this life is short, but this life is not all there is, we can have joy today because we know that there's joy coming tomorrow. Or as the song that we sing, that we're going to sing right now, we will feast in the house of Zion. We will sing at the top of our lungs with our hearts restored. He has done great things. All of the seasons of life that seem about as opposite of great as you can think of right now, finally that day you'll be able to look back and go, He has done great things. I didn't see it then, but boy, do I ever see it now. He has done great things. And for all of eternity, we will say together, we will feast and weep no more, because we're living a life under heaven and not just under the sun.